The phrase a mild traumatic brain injury to me just bothers me, because what's so mild about any kind of brain injury?
So if you or a loved one have been injured in a motor vehicle accident, how do you know if you've got a brain injury? And then what do you do? Well, that's what we're going to ask the lawyer today. Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com. My guest is attorney Claude Wyle with the San Francisco firm of Choulos Choulos Wyle. Claude, thank you for making some time to answer our questions today.
Absolutely, Rob. Thank you for asking me.
So I've heard brain injuries referred to as the invisible injury. Explain that to me a little bit, what that means, and does it make it more difficult to even determine if there is a brain injury after an accident?
Brain injury cases are very challenging because oftentimes, most times, the brain injury is an invisible injury. Somebody is taken into the emergency room, and you can't tell what's going on with the brain unless they're unconscious, unless they can't remember events, unless they can't remember what you just asked them a few seconds ago. Oftentimes, the more subtle brain injuries are very difficult to diagnose, and sadly, they are amongst the most missed diagnoses in all emergency rooms after all accidents in the whole country. They are working on increasing their ability to diagnose concussion and mild traumatic brain injury. And they've made great strides. However, this type of injury is something you really need to tease out through a combination of modalities, because a lot of times it's just really hard to find, but it's so real. It may be invisible, but it's life-altering and devastating to the person who has suffered a head injury.
So if it's not the kind of thing that, you know, it's like you say, it's invisible, and maybe they don't always automatically go, let's run all the diagnosis for a brain injury, how do they usually determine, how do they usually find out if there is a brain injury, Claude?
They usually determine by asking questions. There's a lot of discussion about MRIs and when they should be taken. It's unclear as to whether an MRI is necessary right away, but I don't really think so. What they usually do in an emergency room is do a CT scan, because they want to make sure your brain is not bleeding, so they don't have to perform a surgery right away to save your life. So a lot of times what they do in the emergency department is send you in for a CT scan to make sure your brain is not expanding in your skull, because if it does that, it can cause far more damage when your brain pushes up against the skull and the brain bruises and loses function. So usually the diagnosis of a mild traumatic brain injury happens later, and it's much more of a clinical diagnosis. And that's why it's important to have a lawyer who understands. We understand brain injury at Choulos Choulos Wyle. We've been working on brain injury cases since I was in my 20s. Our senior partner has been very, very active in founding head injury support groups for families all over Northern California. And so it's near and dear to our heart. The brain injury is one of the most complicated injuries and can run the gamut. You can have a brain bleed the first day and then have no symptoms for the rest of your life, or you can have no brain bleed evident the first day, but within a short period of time after they send you home, you can really, really feel a lot of symptoms and experience some real functional loss.
Claude, is there sometimes the injured person may not even be aware that there's a brain injury? Do you sometimes find out it's family members, it's spouses or whatever that say something's not right, and that leads to the diagnosis of a brain injury?
Very much so. So we have a questionnaire for our client, asking them things like, do you have reduced attention and concentration, reduced math skills, greater anxiety, easier to anger, lots and lots of things. Did you have vertigo when you go up in an elevator? Do you just have dizziness when you close your eyes? We have all these questions, and then we ask them if they experience them frequently, occasionally, or never. But then often the key is sending another questionnaire to a family member or a roommate, somebody who's been there to really experience with the injured person the before and after. And this is a very, very good way to tease out what's going on with someone, because a lot of people with head injuries think they're depressed, think they just need to cover this up, they want to keep their job, but their family members or the people who live with them will often be more forthcoming and really have noticed a big difference. And it's hard for them to put their finger on until they get the questionnaire, and then they can really start to work through this. And we realize there's something going on with our client's brain. And this needs to be teased out further through further testing, and down the road through MRI, neuropsychological testing. They need to see a neurologist who specializes in head injury. There are so many ways we need to tease this out, because, as I said, brain injury runs the gamut. And in order to get your client compensated for one of the most devastating injuries they can suffer, you've got to understand head injury, and you've got to send your client to the right places. You need to ask them the right questions, and you really need to watch how their lives are changing or have changed. And it's a delicate move on our part, because you don't want to upset your brain injured client.
Sure.
Oftentimes head injury goes hand in hand with depression, anxiety, other psychological injuries, and you need to have the right expert doctors and psychologists who can tease out the difference between something that happened in somebody's childhood and something that happened when they just had their head knocked and they've lost consciousness, because the symptoms are so similar sometimes.
Right.
You've got fatigue, inability to concentrate, mood shifts, inability to just stay awake or read a book, as I said, math skills. Some of these things can also be attributed to psychological injury, and you've got to tease it out, because sometimes psychological injury can be treated, but brain injury, more often than not, cannot be treated. So it's not really curable. You know, each question about brain injury leads to more questions, and it's through decades of experience. Both my partner, George Choulos, and I, right now, each one of us has at least 10 brain injury cases. We concentrate on this area of injury because, well, it's fascinating, but also because it's so prevalent and it's so hard to diagnose, and then you've got to prove it. And the important thing is, because it's invisible, when you just look at somebody, it's really hard to tell they've had a brain injury. Somebody might be forgetting things, and you just think, well, maybe they're just not that smart. But then you go back into their school records, into their work records. You talk to their boss, their immediate supervisor, their children, their mother. And of course, their mother always says they were a lot smarter before. But it's true more often than not. We represent students who have been injured, and they haven't had a job yet, but all of a sudden their grades plummet. Or we represent people who are functional, and when they talk to you, they sound fine. But why have they just been fired from the last 3 jobs? It's not their behavior. They're not being impolite. They just can't do it anymore. And we have to tease these things out and try to look into the future. What is life going to be like for this brain injured person? Will they be able to earn the living that they should have earned before? So you have to analyze the picture of where they were before and where they're likely to be now. And it requires a lot of attention from the lawyer, a lot of hand-in-hand work with doctors and psychologists and neuropsychologists, and with your clients, and a real true understanding born of years of working with head injured people.
All right, so let's take that leads to the next step then, Claude. So let's say we've gotten, I got a well-qualified law firm like yours. I've taken that next step. We've determined the diagnosis, there is a brain injury. What is the benefit then to go into trial? What can you do for me? What can the firm do for somebody who has suffered a brain injury? Where's the benefit?
Well, the benefit is, okay, brain injuries mostly are permanent. They're permanent and severe. I mean, the phrase a mild traumatic brain injury to me just bothers me, because what's so mild about any kind of brain injury? A concussion is used as a term. Oh, he had a concussion. It's not that big a deal. It can be a very big deal. A simple concussion can have lifelong effects. And you need a lawyer who can determine and work up and learn what these effects are likely to be and present them to the other side to try and get the case settled for real money that is going to compensate your client for what their life is going to be like in the future. And if they won't pay, if the insurance companies won't pay, you need somebody who knows how to present these kind of cases to a jury so they can understand it. Because most of the time your client's going to sit there and they look normal. They look fine. They can talk. They can maintain a conversation. They might start crying on the stand for something, the jury might not understand. You've got to use experts to demonstrate. You have to get MRIs, and these days we have fantastic, much more advanced MRIs than we did 20 years ago, and they can show microscopic problems with the brain. They can show diffuse axonal shearing, which is a problem that they couldn't show 10, 20 years ago. So you need a lawyer who knows how to speak the language and who knows how to present these kind of problems to jurors in a simple, direct, demonstrable way. It's not easy, but we can do it. And frankly, it's so interesting, it's fascinating, and we love doing it because these people who are our clients with head injuries, they need the help so much, and we are so happy to do it for them.
Claude, it sounds very complicated. Like you said, it's not easy, which usually translates to it can be very expensive. What if somebody's thinking, I can't afford somebody to take on my brain injury case?
Well, that's the thing. In a lot of cases, the doctors, you've got an injury. It seems permanent. Why should the doctor want to spend $5,000 on a high-end MRI or all sorts of other tests when they know you've got the problem and it's not likely to be curable? So that's where the lawyer comes in. We advance our time, but we also advance our money. And a lot of times we have to hire the experts who can pick apart the injury, who can do days worth of testing on our clients, who can send our clients out for MRIs, and our office pays for the MRI. We'll pay for the best MRI to show the injury. We will, I just did this with a gentleman who's 73 years old, hit by a car in a crosswalk, and he had a brain bleed at the time of his initial injury, but then later he doesn't work. So there's nobody to evaluate whether he's as smart as he was before, but he has word finding problems. And when I'm talking to him, he'll forget what we're saying in mid-sentence. And so I noticed that. And so I sent him for a special MRI, and lo and behold, there it was. He had evidence in the MRI of problems in his brain, of real permanent injury. And we determine by where the injury is, what kind of problems he's likely to have. And lo and behold, right where he's got the signs showing in the MRI, it's in his ability to talk and word finding. So it all dovetails together. And now, on our third mediation, the defense is finally starting to pay attention to his head injury. It makes a real big difference.
And a client doesn't need to be prepared to pay any money up front, correct?
The client doesn't have to pay anything up front.
Right.
If they've got health insurance and they've got their own doctor who'll send them for the MRI, great. But if they don't, we'll take care of it, because oftentimes it's the only demonstrable way to show jurors, that there is something. Oftentimes we'll put the MRI up, blown up on the screen. The judge will come around from the bench. Everybody will get a really good look, and we'll show what this MRI means, and we'll have a doctor on the stand. We advanced the cost of having the doctor there to describe it all. We'll also, when it makes a difference in somebody's ability to earn a living, we will send our clients to a vocational rehabilitation expert. That's somebody who figures out what you could do before and what you can do now. Mm-hmm. And we take the doctor's evidence, the vocational rehabilitation expert evidence, we take the life care plan, and we give it all to an economist, and the economist figures out what's it going to cost for the rest of this person's life. And even if something's called a minor traumatic brain injury, you'd be surprised it can cost millions.
And you take these cases on a contingency basis?
Absolutely. We do all our work on a contingency basis. I don't bill. I haven't sent a bill out in 35 years. We don't have a form in our office for a legal bill. We base our fees entirely on the success of our cases. We call it a contingency fee, but in our office, we call it a success fee. Because if we're not successful for you, we don't get paid. And you don't have to pay us back for the costs either. We put our money where our mouth is, and we like to invest in deserving cases where we can actually make a difference in our clients' lives.
I love it. Claude, thank you so much. Lots of great information. Thank you for answering our questions today. I do appreciate it.
All right, Rob, it's great to see you. You get lonely out here in the pandemic, being isolated from everyone. So even though you're somewhere across the country and only on video, it's great to see you, man.
Well, hey, and your pandemic haircut looks great.
Thanks a lot. Sorry about the lights today.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been California attorney Claude Wyle. If you'd like to get the best information or you're ready to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, make sure to go to askthelawyer.com. Also, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe so you'll know whenever there's any new episodes available. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Rosenthal with askthelawyer.com.